Welcome back. For those of you just logging in, I am Elizabeth Bramson-Boudreau, CEO and publisher at MIT Technology Review. Welcome to Enabling Autonomous Cybersecurity, a look at advances in artificial intelligence in the field of cybersecurity. Our program today is presented by MIT Technology Review in partnership with Darktrace. This is the second and final one-hour episode. We are absolutely delighted you're here with us. Our first session this afternoon covers results from a recent survey conducted by MIT Technology Review Insights, which is our research arm, and Darktrace. We wanted to get a pulse on how organizations are preparing for AI-enabled cyber attacks. I think you'll find the results really interesting, so definitely stick around. This interview is conducted by Laurel Ruma, the America's Director of MIT Technology Review's Insights team, and Max Heinemeyer, Director of Threat Hunting at Darktrace. What kind of a great name is that? Director of Threat Hunting. They caught up last week, and we will share their pre-recorded discussion now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. My name is Laurel Ruma, and I'm the Editorial Director at MIT Technology Review. And today I have the pleasure to talk with Max Heinemeyer, the Director of Threat Hunting at Darktrace. And we will talk about the new era of countering cybercrime, one that uses offensive AI to supercharge attack campaigns. Max, your bio is on the event website. However, if you could give us a little bit of your background, that would be helpful.
Sure thing. I've got over a decade of experience in cybersecurity. I started as an ethical hacker, doing hacking for life in an ethical sense, breaking into companies for a living, before I changed over to the defensive side, working at Darktrace now, where I hunt the bad guys, where I use AI to catch hackers, cyber criminals, nation-state attackers. And here at Darktrace, I oversee part of the analyst team and bridge the gap between our biggest customers, our analysts, and the development team.
Excellent. So can we start with a definition? How do you define offensive AI?
It's a great question. It's when AI, artificial intelligence, in various forms is applied to attacks, to cyber attacks. And we're going to elaborate on that a bit later. It's not when you use any kind of attack to hack AI. We're not talking about that. We're talking about using AI for hacking, so to speak. And why would criminals or attackers do this? We know that attackers love automation. They love to automate more and more of their tasks to scale up their attacks. Not just attack 1 or 2 or 3 companies at a time, but attack as many as possible. Return on invest increases as much as possible, right? It's like any enterprise, basically. The more they can get for their investment, the better. That's how a lot of cyber attackers think. And we've seen this automation continuum over the last few years increase and increase. So attackers have been naturally adopting more and more automation to increase their scale and their reach. And we absolutely know that AI, using AI for attacks, is going to be the next step to keep scaling this up, to keep attacking more companies at once, and to automate some of the menial hacking tasks that humans still have to do at the moment.
So what are you exactly seeing out in the field to tell you that these types of attacks are escalating?
It is incredibly interesting. Here at Darktrace, with over 4,500 customers, we see exactly what's going on in the cyber trenches, so to speak. And I've got the privilege to oversee these efforts. So we see that all kinds of attacks are happening, be it supply chain attacks, be it attacks against big governments, be it ransomware attacks where data is encrypted, or data exfiltration where data is stolen. But there's one key trend, and I've touched on this a minute ago. All of these attacks increase in furiosity and speed. So whereas years ago, people would have said, oh, attackers, they stay in your network for months at a time and slowly move around, that game has changed completely. These days, the attacking time has gone down to weeks, sometimes even days, from initially coming into a corporate environment to hacking everything, exfiltrating data, or encrypting the data, ransomware. So a trend has definitely been that this continuum has been increasing to more and more automation. And we see that there's also a lot of research being poured into offensive AI. There's open source projects. There's tools like Snap_R, which anybody in your audience can look up and just do a research into. So there are existing projects. We know that criminals are incentivized to keep automating their attacks. It's just a question of putting these two together, and we know that that's already happening. We've seen the first attacks using deepfakes, for example, or using automated social engineering tools. So it's nothing in the realm of sci-fi. It's actually happening today, and we just expect this to escalate going forward.
So with attacks escalating and the threats are becoming more sophisticated as a result, we at MIT Technology Review, the Insights team, actually did do some research of our own on this to survey 300 senior global executive leaders on the topic of offensive AI. And what we found is that 98% of these business leaders are concerned about cybersecurity attacks, which seems pretty obvious. It's a really important topic. It's damaging to the business, et cetera. But they're preparing for it. And 66% of those leaders say that the human-driven response can't keep up with the automated attacks. So what should leaders do to prepare in this new world?
I think your research there is spot on and really reflects what we're also seeing, right? What we're seeing is that attacks are already too fast. It's not like we have to wait for offensive AI. As it is, attacks are overwhelmingly fast and only the most sophisticated teams and companies can withstand today's attacks in the threat landscape. And even they struggle and often fail. So if we're already in this situation where it's too late and it's very difficult to do anything about it with traditional security, imagine the next paradigm shift. Once offensive AI is adopted wide scale, how will anybody be able to withstand this? Imagine dialing this up to 11, 12, or 13, what we already see. Another example is that we've seen ransomware, so software that can encrypt a whole environment and holds them to ransom. We've seen that this is already happening now in certain cases without any command control traffic, with any method of that piece of malware, that virus phoning home. They just drop it and it does its thing. So that makes it much harder to detect, that makes it much harder to do anything against it at machine speed. So what can leaders do to prepare? We think that it's time for some change in thinking. A lot of the security industry has always been focused on historic attacks. Let's look at yesterday's attacks. Let's look at yesterday's malware, yesterday's threats, and try to find them tomorrow. But the news is that this doesn't work. It has never worked. You can't learn what tomorrow's attack is going to look like by looking at yesterday's attacks. It just doesn't work. So what leaders should do is stop focusing on yesterday's threats. Stop thinking too much about yesterday's attacks or threats in general. Rather focus on your own environment. What does your normal business look like? What does your business normally do? How does your business conduct its IT operations? What is normal for your data transfers? How do you interact with your suppliers in the digital landscape? Focus on that and spot the anomalies. This is what we do here at Darktrace with our groundbreaking AI using unsupervised machine learning, where we use breakthrough technology to learn self every single time we see an environment. And by learning self, we can spot anomalies, no matter what kind of attack it is. No matter if it's a zero-day attack, no matter if it's an insider threat, no matter if it's an attack that had never been seen before. So what leaders should do is think about novel technology. Of course, people and processes are also very important, but really what's required and what's available today is novel technology to counter this threat of increased automation on the attacker side and the looming threat on the very near horizon of offensive AI.
So how are we going to help folks on security teams get used to this kind of new scenario? So when we're automating AI for cybersecurity, what about the human consequences?
You're touching on all the important topics there. So this is something I get played back by our customers and prospects almost every single day. And anytime AI or advanced automation is deployed, it's not about getting rid of humans, right? There's always going to be tasks for human operators to do, be it overseeing the AI's efforts, being working in tandem with them. What we think AI should do is augment human teams. So instead of hiring hundreds of threat hunters and trying to train up new cybersecurity experts for every single company, which is never going to scale and never going to work, let the machines do the heavy lifting. Let the machines do the data crunching. Let the machines do the preparation, the analysis work, the instant response, the stopping of attacks, and let the human sit on top and just drive this very complex, very sophisticated machine. So at the moment, we're trying to solve a machine problem, cybersecurity, with humans. And there's a scale gap. There's just not enough humans in the world to work in cybersecurity. And for us, it doesn't make any sense that every small and medium business and even big businesses should try to become the best cybersecurity workforce in the world. They should focus on the business. They should focus on providing best healthcare in the world, should focus on media, should focus on manufacturing, should focus on government businesses, whatever they do, and let the machines work on the security problem. So we see the future, and we already see it in our clients, of the machines doing all the menial tasks and the heavy lifting of finding anomalies, understanding normal, cutting through the complexities of today's flat landscape and IT landscape, because it's too complex for any humans to take into account, and then provide the human with the output, or react to the very fast attacks and contain it. So it's absolutely something we see go in tandem, but don't waste human time on things a machine is much better at dealing with.
So Max, what's your outlook for this next era of attacks? Can defensive AI successfully battle offensive AI?
Yeah, it's a question I hear very often. So who's going to win the battle of algorithms, if you want, right? Is it defensive AI? Is it offensive AI? Who's got the upper hand? We know that this paradigm shift is on the horizon and already happening behind closed doors. If we see that offensive AI prototypes exist in open source projects out there everywhere, and there's a lot of research around it already, and imagine that's the tip of the iceberg, right? We can't see what's happening behind closed doors. We know that most nation states invest millions and billions into AI research, military research, and combining the two. So this is absolutely going to happen. So although it sounds a bit sci-fi, if you want to be cheeky, it's definitely a battle of algorithms, right? It's AI or advanced automation on the attacker side trying to be battled against defensive AI, what we're using here, Darktrace, for example. And we firmly believe we've made breakthroughs and we turned the tables with the advent of defensive AI, like here at Darktrace, as one example, just mentioning this. But the important takeaway is that the defenders have the upper hand, not just in research advantage, but also in data advantage and in visibility. What I mean by this is when we defend a company, we see most of it, the digital this landscape, be it the network, be it the home office workers, be it the email environment, be it the SaaS software as a service environment. The defensive AI sees all of this when it's deployed and understands the context, can stitch all of these things together. Where does Max Heinemeyer work? What kind of data does he access? How does he communicate internally? Where does he send his emails to? And when offensive AI hits and maybe infects a single endpoint or a single server, it only sees that part of the world, right? So there's a data advantage we have where the defensive AI, if it's early deployed, sees everything and has the data advantage. Offensive AI only sees the tiny bit where it can hack into, and then it is blind for the rest. So there's a data advantage. But there's also the progress and advantage in research and development, which is all about the quality in the algorithms and how to put it together. And we've been doing this here for over 8 years. And we're the world-leading company for applying AI to cybersecurity. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I actually think, although there's a lot of dark things on the horizon, that we're in a very good position here. And my advice to leaders and companies is look for these breakthrough technologies, test them in your own systems. A lot of companies say they are using AI, but dig into it. What kind of AI are they using? Is it trained on historic data? We see that a lot, called supervised machine learning. It's basically more of the same. They've seen previous attacks, they try to extrapolate from there. Or is it truly self-learning and unsupervised? For example, what we use here, so you're not bound to previous attacks. You can extrapolate and find completely new ones and withstand tomorrow's storm and win the battle of algorithms.
Max, thank you so much for that great conversation today. I feel like we are definitely in a place of hope and lots of opportunity.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Discussion of the survey result and what's going on at Darktrace interesting and thinking about your own organization's readiness. Thanks to Max and to Laurel. I want to once again call your attention to the polls tab, which is located next to the chat box, and to invite you to answer questions or ask questions. Your insights are important to us. I have the pleasure now of moderating a conversation on leveraging cyber AI in healthcare. Please welcome Justin Fear, the Director of Cyber Intelligence and Analytics at Darktrace, and David Henderson, Chief Information Officer at Millennium Health, which is located within the Biotech Hub of San Diego. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Likewise.
So let's start with you, Dave. To set the stage. So we're going to talk together for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to take some questions. Let's start. Will you tell us what your role is at Millennium Health, and what your organization does, and kind of help us get started and frame the conversation?
Sure, excuse me, thanks. Yeah, so I'm the Chief Information Officer at Millennium Health, primarily responsible for working with the executive team to leverage technology to meet our strategic tactical goals, operational readiness, and of course, responsible for cybersecurity as well. Millennium Health is an accredited specialty laboratory specializing in toxicology in all 50 states. We also do a lot of data analysis that has resulted in several peer-reviewed publications, as well as a partnership with Health and Human Services, where we work together to combat the ongoing overdose epidemic through our signals, reports, et cetera.
Thank you, Dave. So Justin, same for you. If you could just help us understand your role at Darktrace and maybe set up a view for us of how you see the overall threat landscape for healthcare organizations right now. We're obviously all paying a lot more attention than we once were to healthcare organizations. And I'm interested in knowing what kinds of large-scale attacks you see and how is it different, if at all, than before COVID?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I wear a couple different hats when I'm not spreading the gospel on amazing publications like this about the use of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. I'm also working hand in hand with our clients to just think a little bit differently about their security stack and applying artificial intelligence to the many different moving parts of their networks. Sadly, the healthcare industry is a perfect storm. You know, they've got IoT devices galore, literally rolling down the hallways on carts, big CT machines, patient data that is so crucial in protecting. And then there's the billing and the insurance aspect of it. And let's not forget about what we're all dealing with right now with the post or current pandemic situation we're working in. The bad news is the biggest threat that we're still seeing today, pre-pandemic and current/post-pandemic, is ransomware. And that's simply because hospitals, the healthcare industry has the most to lose. It's not just revenue streams. It's literally lives on the line. And ransomware actors know this. They know that a hospital is more likely to pay that ransom to get things back up and running so that they are not making headlines of possibly deaths or other scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously very grim to think about. So I do have more questions on this topic, but before we do that, I'd like to turn to Dave to help set further context. So Dave, prevention and mitigation are key for organizations in the face of any attack. As CIO, you are tasked with spearheading this initiative at Millennium Health. So tell us how Millennium Health has changed its cybersecurity strategy in light of the pandemic.
Sure. And, I think Justin's spot on with respect to the hazards in the healthcare environment. We run 3 shifts. We run almost 24/7, 6 days a week with, a large footprint of medical devices that, we have to protect from exactly that malicious type of ransomware, operational disruption. You have samples going through robots and different scientific instruments. And so and then you have all the business productivity workstations as well. So that analysis is spot on with respect to that ongoing threat in the healthcare organization space. As the pandemic hit and we've had to move most of our non-laboratorian workforce off-site, we have a variety of different tools that we use. The standard endpoint protection and firewalls and cyber hygiene of patching and things like that. But as soon as that happened and we had to move, half of our workforce off-site, we really rely on the Darktrace machine learning approach within our organization to establish what normal is, what the standard pattern of life of data moving across the organization, the instrumentation, the staff, et cetera. And as soon as we moved people off-site, that visibility was really not as prevalent as it was before. And so in response to doing that, when you think about it, we immediately started training our staff to, you are going to be more subject to these types of attacks, right? The attackers are going to take advantage of the fact that everyone just moved off-site. They're working from their home networks, et cetera. But So we increased our training, but then leveraging that AI framework, we also expanded that to email, which is, of course, the most common threat vector, and also to the workstations themselves. So being able to have the Darktrace ML platform associated with the email and with the workstations, even though they were off-site, reestablish that pattern of life, reestablish that visibility, and then enabled us to have a more secure footprint moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And with everybody moving employees off-site, or not everybody, but an awful lot of companies in the economy doing that, it's a vulnerability. So, Justin, just to get a visual, and I'm not even sure I want to know the answer to this, but what would a sophisticated attack on a healthcare system look like if it was successful? Can you paint that picture and maybe just take us there?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, and I'm not happy to report this, we've already seen it. Not more than a year ago, we had our first death attributed to ransomware in a hospital in Germany, where a patient was being routed to a hospital that was currently basically offline because all of the vital systems they needed to provide care were encrypted and being held hostage by that ransom. And am so sad to continuously report this, that person did pass as a result of having to be rerouted to another hospital that was much further away. And that brings up a great point. There are so many interconnected, systems, as I'm sure David can attest to, that are so reliant on the nurses, the doctors, the technicians, the lab techs, that even just one of them going down can really affect business continuity. And I think, unfortunately, in today's day and age, we think of outage, as I already mentioned earlier, in terms of revenue. And that's not the case for medical health, care centers. If the EMR system, the electronic medical record system, goes down, doctors and nurses are literally thrown back into the 60s and the 70s and charting by hand on the bedside. And we all know that in today's day and age, speed is everything when it comes to, providing medical care. The other thing to mention, I talked about earlier, or David mentioned, is the remote working. That still is a part of the medical industry, and they have a whole new host of challenges to deal with, whether it's HIPAA, making sure we're not, introducing HIPAA violations, to actually being able to get that vital information to the doctors and the practitioners out there. So unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's the kind of that perfect storm. Any one of those pieces goes down, and I think hospitals and the various medical industry systems just suffer immensely.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. This event, thus far, we've addressed the idea of AI both as a defense against attacks and as a technology used by cyber criminals as in on the offensive. David, can you tell us your thoughts about AI in relation to preparing and protecting your organization?
Yeah, when you look at the AI space in general, you can see that it's being applied to all disciplines, whether it's marketing or, operations or manufacturing. And so the natural evolution to think that cybersecurity, both offensive and defensive, would not be in scope, right, and would not take a path down machine learning and artificial intelligence is, really kind of just naive in a way, right? To think that, if you're going to leverage this tool set to increase marketing, to increase efficiency in manufacturing, how would it not be leveraged to increase the offensive success, if you will, from their point of view of attacking cybersecurity targets? And so I think that this is only going to become more of a standard, and it's going to be increased rapidly within the general cybersecurity footprint, but certainly, as Justin and you have alluded to, specifically within healthcare. As a matter of fact, on the Sunday morning shows yesterday, the Secretary of Homeland Security was asked specifically about cybersecurity and healthcare. It's come to that level where it's now on the national news with the Secretary of Homeland Security talking specifically about cybersecurity in healthcare because of the reasons that Justin just mentioned. And I think, certainly decades ago, there was always that paper backup. My EMR system stopped functioning. I'm going to do charts on paper. But a lot of today's medical devices and methodologies depend on computers in order to operate, period. So when they get disrupted, you actually don't have an immediate backup necessarily, right? You might have a long-term plan, but if you're using computers to facilitate medical technology and you don't have that computer available, that becomes a real problem. And so I really see this accelerating at a pretty fast rate, both offensively, because it's just more efficient from that perspective. And then thus, of course, it would have to be defensively as well for some of the reasons that we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the last time I saw a pen and a piece of paper in a visit with a doctor. Of course, during COVID, I'm doing an awful lot of those, those kinds of appointments, my family as well, through Zoom or, whatever, virtual in some fashion. But even in offices, it's the doctor's typing everything in from moment one. So I can certainly understand how that's a bigger and more, pressing problem. And that it's being discussed by the Director of Homeland Security is probably comforting, but also terribly uncomforting, isn't it? So Justin, tell us your thoughts on the topic of offensive AI and the broader impact on healthcare.
Yeah, sure. So, I want to echo a lot of what my colleague Max said earlier, that it's not just on the horizon, it is here. It's already in use, whether it's, using it to form more creative social engineering tactics to get our targets to click on that link, to actually just even mining data. It doesn't even have to be the really, crazy Hollywood-esque, AI theory that we all think of. But look at all these big data sets that have, been stolen over the years. AI is the perfect tool to mine and weaponize that data. And I think that's already being done. And as David said, I think it would be naive and foolish to think that nation states and heavily resourced organizations are not already doing just that. So I think we absolutely need to be cognizant of that. The good/bad news, however you want to look at it, is it's still profitable for the attackers to do things the way they're doing it. And unfortunately, that means they're not going to rush off to adopting artificial intelligence and reworking the way they're doing things. But as tools like Darktrace and others make it much harder for them to accomplish their goal, they're going to have to adopt these technologies to streamline, automate, and speed up what it is that they're trying to do. So if you asked me what keeps me up at night, that is absolutely the number one thing that keeps me up. Attacks that last a matter of nanoseconds and not minutes and are so fast that we can't even catch it with the blink of an eye. And that really is what is going to be the big turning point for our industry.
Justin, thank you. I feel like what keeps you up at night is probably what ought to be keeping me up at night. So we should make sure we don't talk anywhere close to when I need to go to sleep. So thank you, David and Justin. We're going to turn to the audience now and pull questions that were submitted during the chat. Again, put them in there, type question in all caps so we can find them. And I apologize in advance if we don't get to your questions. We will answer them as soon as the time allows. So got one question that's come in during the chat. What is the future of conversational AI? And have you seen attacks on conversational AI type systems? Either one of you.
I could start, so we've started to see this in some of the spear phishing emails. Just using things like sentimental analysis to craft the tone of the email to mimic that of the person they're spoofing. And I've said this a lot, that you can only educate your employees so much. Even the best in our industry are starting to get duped by these spear phish attempts because they are so authentic, using the same words speaking in the same way. And so I think that's already been done. I don't think it's a matter of time. I think it's already on our footstep. And as Max already mentioned earlier in the last segment, deepfakes. We've already started to see it being used with deepfakes. One of our clients actually had a deepfake video of their CEO sent to everybody in the organization giving a company address on a very sensitive topic. And so you could imagine what that would do to company morale and other things, if that sort of thing, was spread in your own organization.
Oh my gosh, I mean, that's awful. I have more questions coming in, but maybe ask me, I've got a question here about fostering innovation. Dave, for you, does defensive AI help to support any digital transformation projects or processes you're rolling out at Millennium Health?
I think tangentially it does, because it's the foundation of establishing our normal pattern of life across all of our systems within the organization. It really enables us to accelerate various digital transformation exercises with respect to everything we do, whether it's data processing or document processing or natural language for customer service. One of the things that I see in the landscape over the years is that you're never done with cybersecurity. And what happens is if you're kind of on a quarterly or semi-annual basis and you think you're done, but your digital transformation exercises are going on, which by nature means that your technology is changing, right? And then you have to keep thinking about how is your cybersecurity keeping up with those technology changes. Well, having a real-time ML AI approach helps accelerate that transformation because it's learning as the company transforms. So I think tangentially having that real-time approach is a natural balance with a rapid digital transformation within an organization.
Yeah. A couple more questions. For both of you, either of you, is AI or ML, for that matter, being used to actually help catch the perpetrators or attribute an attack?
Unfortunately, dark trade does not do much in the realm of attribution. I can tell you as someone who came from the intelligence community for the U.S. government, attribution is very hard to do, especially in today's day and age where I can build attack infrastructure and burn it to the ground within 60 seconds and make my attack look like it's coming from somebody else. So it's not something that we're really focused on right now. We're more focused on just detecting and stopping those attacks in the absolute earliest place we can.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, certainly not in my space. As an organization, do we consider that? But I think that is a natural question that's bubbling up within the United States for sure, with global footprint as well, I'm sure.
That feels like a great topic for a MIT Technology Review investigative reporting piece, storytelling. So tell us another question, how is patient data being protected? I think there's a natural concern around, yes, maybe there's a concern around attacking and needing to relocate a patient. I mean, certainly that sounds life and death. But all of us have patient data somewhere in some system. How do we know, how can we feel safe?
Right, and outside of patient safety, which always comes first, protecting patient data is both, it's a mandate by law and certainly, by best practice. And, the way that I leverage the Dark Trace platform within the organization, which by nature is ML and AI, is let me give you a really simple example. And that is because it learns the pattern of life of every employee and every machine and every instrument and says, okay, I have 1.4 million patterns of life based on employees and instruments that I expect to happen every day. And if something steps outside of those lines, I am not only going to alert, but I am autonomously, without intervention from a human being, going to block that process proactively. And the example that I use a lot within the organization is, for example, I normally never move patient data outside of our organization at 2 in the morning through a random port that we've never used before. And so if Darktrace sees that Dave Henderson is all of a sudden moving data from this machine in our organization, even to another machine in our organization, right? A lateral move, or outside the organization, it could be perfectly authenticated. What if my credential was compromised outside the organization and then used in an authenticated way? But Darktrace is going to see that and block that and say, it might be perfectly authenticated, but I've never seen this before, and I'm going to block it. So to get to your question about how do we protect patient data, that is the foundation. It's allowed to move where it's authorized, and if something steps out of those lines, regardless of the reason, it's flagged, blocked, and then alerted.
And if I could just add, another aspect, we think a lot of times about external threats, but there are a lot of internal threats, insider threat, and not to deviate or hijack the conversation too much, because I'm sure MIT Tech Review could do an entire segment on just insider threat, but I've seen a lot of cases where doctors are not necessarily intentionally doing things for malicious reasons, but taking shortcuts or don't understand the security protocols put in place. And so as David, mentioned, looking at the network from a macro level, we're able to spot insiders that are fully authenticated and allowed on the network that just might be doing something different than all of their peers. And we're able to bubble that up to the very top and spot that very early on.
Yeah. I had another question. Somebody's wanting to go back to the topic of voice or video deep fakes. It obviously was touched upon. The question is, I think, perhaps urgently, what is the defense against this? Is there anything more you can share?
Unfortunately, Darktrace, it's not really in the realm of what we do. I know that there is some fascinating research being done by both MIT and other organizations on combating deep fakes, but there's not much I could really comment on specifically how to do that from a Darktrace perspective.
Right. So it's a case of watch this space. Certainly.
Yeah.
We showed earlier the audio of Nicole because she couldn't get into her system, or she lost her phone, or whatever it was. And the idea of someone creating a deep fake video of CEOs isn't exactly reassuring. I don't have a history of creating videos, so maybe it's not such a worry for us. Question is, and I have to say I'm not familiar with this term, but I will give it to you guys, the experts. How can AI help mitigate MITM attacks?
Man in the middle, yeah.
So it's machine to machine. It's machine to machine attacks.
Machine to machine. Got it. Sure. It depends exactly what they're referring to, but if we're talking about lateral movement in the network, moving from one machine to the other, again, it all comes back down to visibility. If the system's never seen a machine talk to another machine before in the past, as Dave already kind of mentioned, using a protocol that's never been used both at a micro level or a macro level, sending certain amounts of packets to various different peers. These are all anomalies. At the end of the day, anomalies are the name of the game. They are the perfect precursor to something potentially bad happening on the network. We oftentimes refer to machine speed attacks, and I think this is probably the biggest strength of AI. And I mentioned earlier, we're going to start talking in terms of nanoseconds. We're not going to have days and weeks to talk about detecting and even mitigating, these attacks. We're going to have to almost detect and mitigate in real time as we move forward. And so I think artificial intelligence is the absolute perfect tool for that, simply because human beings just don't have the compute power to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes eminent sense. Another question about supply chain vulnerabilities. We've only got less than a minute here, but can you explain what a supply chain attack might look like? And again, you hate to ask.
Yeah, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, there's been a lot of news about various different forms of supply chain attacks. They can be software supply chain attacks, as in the most recent one we've seen, and even hardware, where physical chips are actually introduced to specific pieces of hardware and introduced into environments. I think in light of what's most recently happened, it is another area like deepfakes to really pay close attention to, especially as our networks have gotten so complex and hyper-connected. I sadly think we're going to start to see more and more of these moving forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Whew,
agree.
there's a lot more to talk about here.
Yeah, third party is really kind of a growing segment.
Yeah. There's a lot here. I'm sorry we have to wrap because I feel like starting to get really lively here. But I want to thank you both for your time and your responsiveness.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So our final session today is pre-recorded and delivered by Mike Beck, who is the Global Chief Information Security Officer at Darktrace. Seems like the guy with the answers. I had the pleasure to see Mike present in Singapore a couple of years ago, back when we traveled, at an event produced by MIT Technology Review, and he is the real deal. He is a veteran practitioner. He has both government and private sector experience in tactical cyber defense. I hope you enjoy Mike's session. He addresses an important topic faced by organizations all around the world, which is about under-resourced and outpaced teams, wow, that are charged with all of this, the daunting task of investigating sophisticated and ever-evolving cyber threats. He has been working to help security teams tackle this challenge for a long time, many years, and he's going to share his work with you. I hope you find it interesting. I certainly found it interesting. So let's go to the video, please.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name's Mike Beck. I'm Global CISO here at Darktrace, and I wanted to talk today about how we're using AI to think like a security analyst here at Darktrace. So one of the problems, or one of the biggest problems we're facing in our industry right now is the fact that cyber actors are pervasive. And I think if we break those groups down, just to give you a little flavor about who is actually doing the attacking, if we start at the top here, it's nation-state actors. And of course, there are different motivations in some of those groups. So some are conducting traditional espionage, targeting governments, targeting defense. I think there are others that are looking for strategic depth in another country. So gaining access to power systems or placing themselves in centralized locations like stock exchanges or financial institutions. I think there are a whole range of actors on the nation state side that are just out there to cause embarrassment to another country. So if we think back last year to the World Health Organization, who had details of credentials leaked and things like that, that was purely about causing embarrassment to that group at a time during the global pandemic. I think the second grouping here is probably one of the biggest that is out there, and it's organized crime. It has become huge business. And through our lens at Darktrace, we're seeing things like ransomware groups dominate the threat landscape, and they're evolving at pace. And there's a division of labor here even between development teams and those that are doing the targeting and extorting. And there's even a support ticket process where attackers can submit bug fixes on some of these platforms as well. I think not unsurprisingly, this level of sustained attack has led to even legitimate businesses springing up around them. So things like trusted third parties that are going to handle the exchange of funds between an attacker and a victim as well. And the final grouping here is just individuals. And I think, one of the things we all need to be aware of is that individuals within our organizations are often the cause of attack, either letting the attacker in or circumventing controls to get something done, or being malicious inside themselves. One of the things I also wanted to talk about here was the compounding problem for businesses. So not only they are being attacked from the outside, they're also being hit from the inside as well. So when I talk to my industry peers, they often relate to the problems of just finding talent and being able to maintain that. So the New York Times reported recently that by the end of this year, there's going to be 3.5 million unfulfilled jobs in cybersecurity. The second point here is digital transformation actually increases risk. And I don't think that's unsurprising, right? Because actually digital transformation programs are often all about kind of moving to third parties, increasing resilience, and adding kind of more complex technologies in. And of course, that can be fantastic for business operations, but it actually increases complexity and exposes a surface for cyber attack. And the final point here is that humans are fallible. So absolutely, when we look at how attackers get in, quite often it comes down to social engineering. It comes down to the humans inside our business actually letting people into the organization. So one of the things I really wanted to talk to you all about today, and the focus of the talk, is this mimicking the human analyst. How did we at Darktrace go from human operations and kind of ingesting alerts in through human analysts through to where we sit today, having an AI analyst that can always evaluate, always kind of understand the context in which the alerts are appearing. Doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep, doesn't need to take annual leave or PTO. It's an analyst that is always there and constantly crunching and doing what AI is good at, looking broadly across huge amounts of data and making sense of it. So for us, this was a project that started nearly 3 years ago now. It was a mixture of our cyber analyst team, so those with domain knowledge, and a number of people on our kind of dev and mathematics side. So people around that, like Dr. Carl Saljay and our CTO, Jack Stockdale, who kind of head up the dev and the data science part. And for us, it was, how do we take what our analysts are doing today in their analytical operation? And for us, again, it's about understanding that analyst knows. How do they go down rabbit holes? How do they look at data? What data pots do they go to triage and understand and kind of get more and more context and build a picture where they get to the point that becomes a really interesting cyber narrative. So for us at Darktrace, it's very much about how do those analysts operate and being able to build out a model underneath that, which include labeling data sets, looking at the different types of data available, where those analysts kind of go into and the next steps that they take, that we've been able to produce an AI analyst that can mimic how they operate. And that's been a huge, huge kind of leap forward in terms of detecting cyber attack today. I've got a number of kind of points on here in terms of the machine learning. I think one of the really important points that I can't stress enough, and some of the challenges that we faced in developing an AI analyst, is that how do you start to stitch together kind of human readable security narratives that we can start to elevate out to the teams. And for us, it was all about going from pools of alerting and having the AI analysts build out models for kind of what could be taking shape. And on top of that, being able to surface out in a really succinct way a number of small narratives that the security team could really help focus themselves on. In and amongst everything that we've seen in our customer base and talking to people about how AI analysts kind of works and improves their day-to-day kind of functioning across human teams, I think there's one piece here that I really just want to point out to you, and it's that fact that it reduces the time to triage by over 92%. And that's quite an amazing statistic when we think about the art of being able to add kind of constant evaluation of data and being able to kind of search for cyber attackers 24/7. For us and kind of speaking to our customers, this is one of the biggest things we've been able to achieve with cyber AI analysts, is just making sure that the AI is constantly running, doesn't go on holiday, doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, it's always there and is always part of the security operation, helping our customers to scale. In here, I just wanted to kind of really get across to everybody that one of the challenges of getting all of this working, and I touched on it previously, was getting to the point where you could start to report in natural language. And for us, that's been really, really critical. We spent a lot of time being able to kind of build out how the AI can report this back into human teams. And for us, getting that gel between the human security operator and the AI output has been absolutely critical. Another thing I'd love to flag, because I think it's really important, and I've seen it kind of how important it is globally, is the fact the AI can work in native language. So if you're a Spanish team sat kind of looking at security operations, AI analyst is working with you in Spanish or in Japanese or German. And I think that's a huge part of how our AI has been able to kind of sit alongside so many global teams and add value to what they're doing today. I wanted to talk briefly about a case study because I think this just kind of brings it to life in terms of where we are today in 2021, having an AI be able to operate across the security stack and be able to elevate out what security teams need. In this particular example, this is a state actor who were exploiting using a zero day. So there was no protection to this. The actor had free rein to come into those edge systems, to exploit the vulnerability, and to get a foothold in those organizations that they targeted. And for us, one of the biggest things where AI analyst has been able to achieve and just showcase how powerful it is, in the organizations that were hit, that were using Darktrace with AI analysts kind of wrapped around them, in a 1 week window, the highest priority thing that was being showcased to those human teams was a state actor with a zero day. And I just think that is such a powerful message to showcase that we're in a place where the AI can be running your security operation, taking in that data, making sense of it, and elevating out that there's a state actor that started to get a foothold in your organization. I'm going to go into an example now for you. So here we have the Darktrace UI. I'm not going to go into all of the features, but I'm very quickly just going to show you how some of the alerting presents itself. So at the bottom here, we have all of the kind of raw alerting. So this is the anomalies mixed with the security context. So we have things like unusual S3 resource creation. The next view we have is a distribution view, so we can start to see over a time series, are there clusters of events that look interesting to us? So here is a cluster here of a device triggering multiple different alerts at different thresholds, so that might be interesting to look at. And the third view here is AI analyst. So let's dive into a couple of examples. You can see here over a 7-day period that the AI analyst is showing us 6 results. We dive in and take a look at what AI analyst is showing. We can see very quickly that there's a timeline of events. It's taken into account 3 particular parts to this attack. We have some scanning of multiple devices. We have some drive writes via SMB, and we have some C2 as well. An AI analyst is intended to give you this narrative very quickly. It's showing you that there's a source device involved here. It's showing you it's targeted different ranges. It's showing that the scanning has taken place over 2 TCP ports, 139, 445. If we look at the SMB activity, it's showing you immediately some of the executables that are being written across to C dollar. And then on the final part here with the C2, AI analyst has picked out that there's an endpoint being contacted, some of the URI strings involved. And then, oh, by the way, with additional bit of analysis here from AI analyst, we can see some other interesting endpoints being contacted. And then on top of that, we can start to see that there's a whole range of other devices that have been contacting these endpoints as well. And this is exactly the sort of stuff that as a cyber analyst, I would be putting together and would have taken me hours. I'm going to really quickly show you what this will look like if part of your team is sat in a different geography. So if you're in the Japanese team and working with AI analyst, you're viewing this in native language and you're able to kind of see exactly the same results. And if you wanted to output this, you can do. If you want to make comments, you can do. I'm just going to show you how to generate a report as well. And you can trigger the API activity as well. So here's what it would look like, just a machine-generated output from the data. So you can see very, very quickly that AI Analyst is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And I want to make the point here that actually during our trials and working with our customer base, we've seen people experience a 92% reduction time in terms of triage of raw alerting, which I just think is incredible. And you can imagine the amount of human resource that then becomes available more broadly to the security operation. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you've kind of experienced how important it is to mix in a human and AI operation into your security teams, and where Darktrace have been able to kind of produce R&D that maximizes that and helps security teams around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike Beck, and all of our speakers today. I want to once again and finally call your attention to the polls tab, which is located next to the chat box, and invite you to answer the questions there. And so that concludes our program for today. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and a sincere thanks to Darktrace for partnering with us on this event. Remember, if you missed anything or want to review any of our sessions from today, they'll be available to you on demand through the platform, as well as any speaker materials and resources from your hosts. And for more on artificial intelligence, I hope you'll consider joining us for our next event, MTech Digital, which kicks off tomorrow. It is our annual AI-focused event. This year's theme is the age of implementation, which is a natural continuation from today's conversations. We will drop the link in the chat here, and you can find more information at mtechdigital.com. That's EMTECH digital.com. Once again, thank you, Darktrace. Thank you to our speakers, and all of you, thank you for joining us. Stay well.